Welcome to this episode of Talking Transformation, an Australian Transformation and Turnaround Association initiative. We hope you enjoy the varied conversations and experiences shared by our industry transformation and turnaround leaders. If you'd like to know more about AusTTA, you can visit our website at austtta.org. I'm the series host, Jackie O'Dowd. Today I'm talking with Kelly Parker. Kelly is a commercial and insolvency lawyer with Murfitt Legal here in Perth. Kelly and I have known each other for a while. In fact, my organisation's been a client of Murfitt for some time. So welcome, Kelly, to the AusTTA podcast.
Thanks, Jackie. Pleased to be here today.
You provide business and legal advisory services. As we said, you're a commercial and insolvency lawyer. So when people are working through different phases of the business life cycle, the whole topic is, why should they call a lawyer first? So why do you think when people are contemplating that life cycle, what's the first thing they should do when they call you? What should they ask?
So I think, Jackie, there can be a bit of a perception that lawyers are going to be really expensive and that you only go to them when you're in trouble. But the truth of the matter is that's only a small percentage of lawyers that do dispute resolution things. So when you're looking at contemplating going into business, then it can be really valuable to speak to a commercial lawyer up front, because they can talk to you about all the risks that you might not be aware of in relation to your business. And usually when you're starting off a business, there's lots of excitement. If you've got business partners, you're all best mates, and everything is roses. But the best way to succeed in business is to plan and to have contingency plans in place. So by seeing a lawyer, they're able to point out the risks that you might encounter within business and help you to put plans in place to mitigate those risks, such as at the really outset, putting a shareholders agreement in place for you and your business partners. Because like I said, you're all friends and everything's rosy to start with, but life gets in the way sometimes. And by the time you're looking to exit a business, you might not be quite so friendly. And it's nice to have a rule book that you agreed upon when you were friends that you can rely on in trying to navigate your way through an exit from a business.
Do you see many businesses that don't actually have a shareholder agreement?
Way too many.
Really?
Yeah, I'd say of the businesses that come through, probably more don't have shareholders agreements than do. Probably because we see the ones that don't have the shareholders agreements because it's all gone badly for them. They're not friends anymore and they're having a fight. When those things arise and there is a shareholders agreement, it's fantastic because we go, okay, well, what did you agree before? These are the rules that we play by. This is how we exit it. And it's a lot cheaper that way than it is if there's no shareholders agreement in place.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting conversations I've had in the last couple of months over shareholder agreements is the impact it has on estate planning as well.
Yes.
So if something, when, like you said, when everybody goes into business, they're best friends and they think everything is going to work out well. But then if something happens to one of the partners or the shareholders, stakeholders, whatever term you want to use in that business, let's say shareholders, then if their shareholding transposes off to a member of their family, that can become really problematic, can't it?
Well, that's right, because I know I didn't go into business with my business partners' spouses. That's not who I want to run my business with. They're lovely people, but I don't need to be running my business with them. So, for example, our shareholders agreement actually says that in the event of passing, then it's a sale option. So you actually automatically put your shares up for sale. But not only that, we have insurance in place for that. So we've got a buy-sell agreement in place, which says that should I pass away, then my estate is paid insurance, and that's compensation for my shares that are transferred off to my business partners.
It's really worth thinking about, isn't it? The legalities of starting the business and setting the framework up properly.
Exactly. Because if we're talking about, exiting a business when there is a death or a serious illness, that's traumatic enough as it is. You don't need to then deal with disputes of trying to exit your equity out of the business at the same time, because there's more important things to be trying to deal with at that point.
All right. So shareholder agreement is one of the key things that people need to think about. One of the other downsides when we start a business is everybody says, oh, the terms and conditions are boring.
And they're too long.
And they're too long.
But they're vital. They're absolutely vital. The whole reason we go into business is to make money. Let's be really honest about that. We could be volunteering our time if it was something else. We're here to make money, and if you want to make money, you need to have your terms and conditions in place, and you need to protect yourself. You need to consider whether or not you can take security, so that you can be a secured creditor if things go wrong with your customers and stand at the head of the queue to get paid first. You need to think about whether ownership of your goods passes to your customer before they get paid their invoice or not. There's so many different things that the terms and conditions do, including they set the terms and the boundaries for your relationship with the client. It's very, very hard if you don't have terms and conditions to challenge a client on the boundaries of your relationship if you don't have that in place.
Do you think people set and forget them? So
Yes.
they create them when they first start, and then they don't look at them for the next 10 or 20 years?
Yeah, they do. Or worse yet, they Google terms and conditions and use another industry as a template. So they have all sorts of wrong terms and sometimes wrong parties referred to in the terms and conditions. Look, it is a living document, and it needs to change and grow with your business. If you start off as a very small business, you might not be quite so strict because you're quite boutique. You're dealing in relationship, close relationships with your clients. But as your business grows and you don't necessarily have those close relationships with your clients any longer, you really do need to look at whether your terms and conditions are suitable.
I think it's really important too, when you're looking at any form of transition or transformation in a business, that the terms and conditions get pulled up and re-looked at, because the products or services that you're potentially going to sell or how your business has changed will impact your terms and conditions.
Definitely.
And do you see that when organisations go through transformation and when they work with consultants and advisors like us, that terms and conditions and agreements are uppermost in people's minds?
Look, unless they've got someone like you on board, Jackie, no, it's really not. They tend to forget about that, but the other thing is that the laws change around these things as well. So if your business is transitioning and you're maybe going into different fields or expanding your service delivery, there may be different legislative requirements that you have to comply with. So some of the more busy, sort of savvy business owners, they will be aware that they might need to update things or they've got new rules to play by. But for a lot of it, business owners are the ideas people, and they need somebody else to be actually doing that implementation and the minutiae, the details that help them with their risk mitigation.
Yeah. So realistically, it's something that people should schedule on a regular basis.
Every couple of years. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, and it doesn't have to involve your lawyer every time either. It can just be, go back and read them. Because I would query for any business owner, when was the last time you read your terms and conditions?
I know in our business, we do ours probably every 2 or 3 years, unless we've had a change. So it's a good practice.
It is, and with us, our terms and conditions are our cost agreements, and we're highly regulated as lawyers. But it's something that's a living document. As we encounter different circumstances, there are changes made to our cost agreements.
Yeah. So when we're starting the business, then we should call our lawyer for all our agreements to understand the regulations and make sure we've got the personal protections in place. As the business moves into its next part of its lifeline and we're getting into running the business, what are some of the things that you see that are issues when people run a business?
Oh, there's so many things. That's when you can start getting into disputes with your customers. So it might be that you've got customers that aren't paying. So speaking to your lawyer about what's a good debt collection process to have in place. It's really boring, but just having good processes in place, making sure that you're the squeaky wheel your customers are always responding to. It can be negotiating new contracts. So where you're used to doing small one-to-one contracts, you might now be dealing with larger customers. And they might have their own terms and conditions that you're having to comply with. So having someone that's able to read through the legalese of some of those contracts and advise you on what the risks are. Too many times I see customers that have just signed contracts with some of your bigger players, like your BHPs, your Rio Tinto, some of the construction companies, and they just think there's no ability to change. I just have to accept it. Well, there's two parts to that. I've had changes made to those contracts from time to time. There are other times where they do dig their heels in, but understand what you've signed, understand the rules you're playing by, because the worst thing is if you come to me and say, this is what's happening and it doesn't seem fair, and I read the contract and say, well, you signed up to that. So, go on.
And that's an amazing thing, because that's what I find when we do advisory for businesses, and especially in the world of software. The vendor really has no idea what they've sold, and the client has actually got no idea what they've bought.
It's because those contracts are like reading a different language, Jackie.
But when it comes to a dispute, you know, that's the first point of call.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And I think the other thing is keeping records as well. So when you have meetings and if you do have a dispute, one part of the evidence that lawyers will ask you for is what we call contemporaneous notes you've taken during a meeting or immediately after a meeting to record what's happened. So, you know, even if it is just having a hard copy diary, and you've written a couple of notes against the meeting to say what it is that you think you've agreed, what you've discussed during that meeting, having records of what you do outside of your contracts is really important as well, because it's not just the written contract, it can be the words we say around it and the other agreements we make once we're already in the contract.
Yeah. It becomes a bit of a minefield, doesn't it?
It does.
And then it's interpretation and all of those things. So when as people are running businesses, there are good times and there are bad times. There are peaks and troughs, and sometimes, like you've said, there are times when money doesn't come in as regularly or as frequently as it should for non-payment. But then there's also just general cash flow issues and where the business starts to go under pressure.
Yeah.
So what sort of advice do you typically, and I know it would be very specific, and this is not advice to anyone in particular.
Thank you. I probably should have started with that caveat, shouldn't I?
but given that, what sort of advice can you provide, and how can you help someone who's really, under pressure, getting stressed, cash is tight? How can a good lawyer help in that situation?
I think some of it starts with how you set things up to start with. So that early intervention is always going to be the key here. So if you've got advice on how you're structuring things to start with, if you've got advice around trying to minimize the number of personal guarantees that you're signing, that assists. And then at the first sign that you think there's cash flow issues, usually that's because you've got an ATO debt. So the business will have some sort of problem with the ATO, whether it's that they've got to put a payment arrangement in place or they're defaulting on a payment arrangement. The key there is making sure that you still lodge your ATO lodgements within their due dates, because the risk can be director penalty notices, which make the directors personally liable for the business debt. So if you've got all of your lodgements up to date, notwithstanding you haven't paid them, you get a bit of a get out of jail free card, in that you have a small window to deal with the company before you become personally liable for the ATO debts. Whereas if you haven't been lodging everything on time, then there's every chance you're going to lose the get out of jail free card, and you're just going to actually become personally liable for the ATO debts. So managing the ATO, managing all of your stakeholders, talking to the bank early on about what options you have available to you, looking at the depths of what that cash flow looks like, a cash flow issue looks like. Is it short term? Is it just, I've got these 2 months because I had a lag in pipeline 12 months ago, so I know these next 2 months are going to be really hard, but I'll get through that because my future pipeline's looking fine? Is it I can't see the pipeline, so I really don't know where the business is going next? Really identifying that and having somebody outside your business that's not in there day to day come and take an objective view of what's happening can be really helpful. You might not like the answers, but at least it's realistic. And there are things like safe harbour plans. So a couple of years ago, there were some amendments to the Corporations Act, which allowed for directors to get advice from a suitably qualified insolvency person, where you could put together a plan for your company that looked like it would have more likely have a better outcome for creditors than if you were to put the company into voluntary administration or liquidation. So that really involves that first warning sign, getting some advice, because that then becomes a shield and protection against insolvent trading claims if the worst happens and the company ends up in liquidation. And I should probably say an insolvent trading claim is, because I can see you go, what's that?
What's that?
It's a claim that a liquidator can make against a director for debts the directors incurred on behalf of the business at a time when the business was insolvent, or the director should have known it was insolvent. So, and then the liquidator can seek compensation from the director for that. That's often a really big figure, and that can, So those are the sorts of things that you want to make sure that you've got some really good asset protection strategies in place from the outset, and that first sign of cash flow warnings, do we need to be putting a safe harbour plan in place?
So tell me a little bit more about the safe harbour plan. What's usually involved in the thinking in something like that?
It is holistic. So it's not just one thing. It's taking a look at the whole of the business and looking at it and saying, what do we need to do to make this business survive? Do we need to look at where our employees are at? Have we got too many employees? Can we scale up? Can we scale down? What can we do there? Where are our creditors? How are we going to manage those? Are we going to put some payment plans in place? Are we going to approach the ATO for a payment plan? Are we going to look for capital? Are we going to look for a bit more debt? Are we going to the bank? Have we got some private investors? What within our business isn't working? Do we need to drop a delivery line because it's just losing us money? Do we need to spend some money and expand a delivery line because there are some great opportunities there? So it's really holistically looking at the business and doing a review on what works, what doesn't work, and how you can streamline and save some money so that you can get through to the next stage of the business.
Well, there's an old saying, isn't there? Cash is king.
Exactly.
So getting it and protecting it in a business is just about everything.
Exactly.
So once we've got through our hurdles and we've got the cash to carry the business, that's great. The life cycle continues. But if we don't, then there's obviously some options at the end. And there's probably, we can say the business is insolvent, we can declare bankruptcy, we can do some sort of exit strategy. Which do you see are the most common? Which ones do you see most of?
Well, I think I have a biased view because I'm an insolvency lawyer. I see a lot of insolvency. And I've got to say, insolvency doesn't necessarily have to be the death of a business. There are insolvency options, including a voluntary administration, which can be the revitalisation of the business, and the business can survive moving forward. But there are a lot of other options. It might be that there is just a wind down of the business. So just a slow, systematic stopping doing business with certain clients and just really going, okay, we just want to do this in an orderly fashion, selling off the assets yourselves and then shutting down the business. There can be a sale of the business. So that's probably one of the bigger ways that you tend to see businesses exit, is it's a sale. And for selling the businesses, again, there's a whole gamut of options there. So it could be that you sell it to somebody within the business. So it could be a management buyout or a staff buyout, in which case you might be continuing on in the business in a different capacity. So you're remaining on to continue to mentor your staff, and continue to really just hand over your business relationships to the new owners. There can be a complete buyout where the shares are bought, so you exit completely. There can be just an asset purchase where you're left with the shell of the company and the debts that sit in there, and you've just sold all of the assets out of the business. And there can be any combination of all of those ones together.
I'm curious about the voluntary administration. I've known of organisations that have had administrators appointed by banks. That hasn't always worked out the way that it should. Is that a regular thing?
I've seen, if I've recommended that a client goes into voluntary administration, more times than not it works, because the voluntary administration process itself is not necessarily a cheap process. So you need to know going in that there's a really viable business to protect coming out of the back end of it. There are a number of reasons that you might put a company into voluntary administration and not want to see the company come out the back end of it. But if you've got a director and employees that are really gung-ho about the business, they believe in the business and they've got the energy and the stamina to keep going, because that will often be the thing that sees the business not succeed, is that the directors and employees have gone through a really stressful time and they just don't have the passion for it any longer.
Not anymore. Yeah.
You can have all the money in the world, but if you haven't got the passion for it any longer, it's not going to succeed.
Well, there's nothing to keep you going, is there?
Exactly.
It's just all becoming really hard work. Now, I've seen a couple of businesses that have done that whole turnaround bit and have come out much stronger on the other end, because they've been able to realize what gaps they had. And even some of those are just knowledge gaps.
I was going to say, probably because they've been through a huge education process.
Absolutely.
They know all the reasons it failed to start with, right? So they now understand the mistakes that they made and can say, okay, not going to do that again. It was too expensive. It was too stressful. I came so close to losing everything. I don't want to go back there.
Okay.
I think, Jackie, that is the key to business, is education. It's the key to risk mitigation. It's education. Knowledge is key. And you and I aren't experts in other areas. So there are areas within my business I'll seek out experts. Because I can't be expected to know everything. So the key is just to seek out the experts at the appropriate times, and the earlier the better.
Yeah. And look, we're exactly the same. We have good lawyers to help us with, because every client contract is different. Like you
Exactly.
said, the big thing in my space is the signing of non-disclosure agreements. And we could have a whole conversation on confidentiality and non-disclosure. And some of the really onerous clauses that you find in these deeds, the non-disclosure deeds, which seem to go forever. And they really are, unless they're not written in plain English, they tend to loop around. So having really good advice, as much as we can provide really good guidance and advisory, even for people like, as you said, like us, we need to go out and get specialist support.
That's it. And Jackie, I'm going to pick up on what you just said there about plain English and contracts not being in plain English. You want to get a lawyer that drafts in plain English. It's not, we don't all do it. I like to think I do. Sometimes my clients say I don't understand still, but then I haven't done my job properly. Because if you don't understand your own contracts, how can you make sure your customers are complying with it? So I think the easiest way to have to be able to comply with contractual obligations is make it clear. Yeah. And make it in language that anybody could pick it up and read it and go, oh yeah, I understand what I need to do.
Yeah. And if there's a deliverable as part of that contract, make sure it's well defined and everybody understands what it is.
That's it. I think sometimes my clients would get annoyed with me that I might harp on about certain details, but there's a reason for it because it's important and we all need to be on the same page about it.
Yeah, we do. So what happens in the exit event? Like you said, you can sell the business and there's different guises of that. What are some of the things that people need to think about when they're looking to sell?
Okay.
Because that can be a big thing too, because they have an inflated opinion of what their business is actually worth.
Exactly. So that was where I was going to start, is have a good, realistic view on what your business is worth. If you've worked in your business for 40 years, it has been your life's blood. You have given up relationships for it. You have sacrificed for it. I can guarantee you the value you put on that business is higher than you will achieve because you're coming at it from an emotive point of view. The amount you want for your business and the amount you will get for your business are often two very different topics. And it's worth talking to a good accountant at the outset about what a realistic valuation of your business is. At the end of the day, you can have all the valuations in the world and it's only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. But at least having had an accountant look at the figures and say, this is what it's worth, gives you a starting point. I had a meeting with a client recently that they just worked through some critical times through their cash flow. They'd come through COVID and came to me and said, I just want out now. COVID has pointed out there are more important things in my life. And I said, okay, that's great. So what do you want to achieve from a sale? And he had a figure in mind. And it involved being debt-free, basically. I said, well, for you to walk away from this debt-free, that means your business has to be worth X. And luckily he had his accountant with him. And I said, and is that achievable? And they said, no. But that's okay. That's not the end of the conversation.
No.
Because then it's a matter of, all right, so what do we need to do to get it there? Have you got, if a company comes in and does due diligence on you, are all of your employees being paid correctly? Are they on the right awards? Have they got all contracts in place? Have you got proper terms and conditions in place? What are your debt collection policies and procedures? What do your customer contracts look like? Do you have a clear view on what those obligations are? Are there any disputes within the business? Have you got clear policies and procedures so that everything is clearly written out instead of just sitting up here in your head? Have you got business plans? Have you got all of those things to make your business sale ready? So for this client that came to see me, it was, okay, what's your timeline to exit? Because from my point of view, this is a 2 to 3 year project. You need to start planning your exit a lot earlier than I want out tomorrow.
Yeah.
because if you want out tomorrow, it's a fire sale and you're not going to get the most value out of it. But if you've started planning how you're going to transition yourself out of that business so that the business doesn't revolve around you, and you've got all those key contracts and procedures and policies in place, you're going to optimize the value you can get for your business.
Yeah. I worked with a client who started 4 years out. And when we gave him that advice, and we said, look, you need to have your procedures in place. He said, they're so bloody boring. Everybody here knows what they're doing. We don't need to write it. That's just such a waste of money and time. But it really isn't. And, at the end, he actually maximized the sale value of that business because, like you said, he could prove that it wasn't just dependent on him.
Yeah.
There was a standard way of doing and being in the business. And all of those process models and relationships and systems connections that we actually defined made that business more valuable to the organization that was buying it, because they could almost stress test it from paper or from a piece of software. Yeah. And it just makes such a huge difference.
It really does. It really does. Because I think you have to, in those circumstances, put yourself in the other person's shoe and say, would I be willing to pay that for what you're offering? Because realistically, your answer would be no.
No. And for general consultants that are working in this space, they've all got businesses. A lot of it is intellectual property based, it's know-how based, it's experience based. It's really important, even for people who are running single person operations, that they still do the same thing.
That's right. And if for no other reason than if you get hit by a bus tomorrow and someone has to come in and clean it up, where do they know how to, where do they start?
Where do they start?
What do they do? That, how is it that somebody comes in and just unwinds it all for you?
It's not as easy as it seems, is it?
It's not.
All right, now I'm conscious of time, so I've got one more question.
Okay.
What are the most common questions you get asked every day about commerciality and insolvency? Are they common questions? Yeah.
I'd say it's not a common question, they're common issues.
Okay.
So common issues that I see in commerciality and insolvency are, how do directors get paid? Are they paid a salary from their business, or do they take drawings? Now, a lot of times directors will take drawings because it minimizes tax. However, when bad times have come about, and the directors have continued to take their drawings because they need to pay their mortgage and they have their living expenses that they need to keep going with, but the business has not been profitable and has not been able to issue dividends to offset against those drawings account, the end result will be a loan account that the director owes to the company that a liquidator will ask to get paid. It's a huge issue and it's scary.
Wow.
It is. So that's one of the really common things. And knowing your structure, you would be surprised the number of clients that I have that do not understand the structure of their business and the interconnectedness of any group entities as well. Yeah. I oftentimes can spend quite a few hours at the outset trying to unravel it and figure it out for myself. And the clients say, well, how did you work that out? Well, I shouldn't have had to. If you don't know what your structure is, you're not optimizing it and using your asset protection strategies to their maximum.
Well, there's so much in this conversation. There's so much. We're so bored. And considering it all started from, why should you call your lawyer first?
Exactly. Because we can help with risk mitigation.
Yeah, and I think it's more than that. I think it's the advisory too. So there is the practical side of the risk mitigation, but I think it's a great way to just say, give me another opinion, give me another view. What are the rules for this? And what are the rules frameworks I'm having to work in? Because I think that's where people get lost.
I think so. And I think you're right. I've got clients where I do sort of ride shotgun with them on running their businesses, where every now and then they'll be worked up about something and saying, this is what's happening and this is what I think needs to happen. And I'm getting pushback from people. And sometimes I can say, well, you're getting pushback from people because you're wrong. You need to do it this way. Oh, or I'm thinking about this. It's like, no, you're too stuck in minutia. I come back up. You just need to simplify it and do it this way. So just having that sounding board can be really, really valuable as well.
I think it is. It's invaluable.
Mm.
So has this conversation's been invaluable as well? I'm sure people are going to get an awful lot from it. So thanks for taking the time out of your day, because I know you're incredibly busy. And if people want more information, how do they contact you?
Thanks, Jackie. It's been a great conversation. You can contact me by hopping on the website Murfitt Legal, for Murfitt Legal, which is murfitt.com.au. My email, kelly.parker@murfitt.com.au. But all my contact details are on the website, so feel free to reach out.
And there's some great resources on the website too, because I had a look earlier.
We try our best to keep everybody updated, and sign up for our newsletter, because you do get regular updates on changes that are happening within the business world.
All right. Well, once again, thank you. It's been an absolutely great conversation. And as I said, I'm sure people have got lots out of it.
Thanks so much, Jackie. It's been great chatting.